Hello and welcome to Property Matters, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. You can find this weekly property show live every Sunday on propertymatterstv.co.uk or by searching Property Matters TV on YouTube or Facebook. Whenever and wherever we go live, when you're enjoying the show, we'd love your comments, please. And if you'd like to email us, the address is hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. Property Matters is also available as a podcast, available on the Monday morning after the Sunday show at 10 a.m. from wherever you get your podcast from. So let's take a look at this week's property news with our property expert, Joe Joshi. Hi, Joe.
Yes, good morning, and hello to everybody. What a week. Well, there's never a dull moment in property. It's all happening at the moment, isn't it? Is it going up? Is it going down? Is it going sideways? I mean, it's just like the buzz going on. So we'll try and keep on top of it for you.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk this week, isn't there, Joe, about what the Chancellor's going to do in his statement that's coming up on the 17th of November, this coming Thursday, as a matter of fact. And a lot of talk in the press about the fact that he's going to hammer landlords and property owners with potential rises in capital gains tax and inheritance tax. But we won't dwell on that today. We'll look at that when we have the facts next week, I think is a wise thing to do. And let's get into our first story, which is key points for selling homes in late 2022. Thought this was quite interesting this week. We've often featured things like this, haven't we, Joe, where we've talked about the things that people really look for when they're looking to buy a property. But there's some interesting ones that have come into this list here. So I thought we'd share this with the dear viewer today. Orangeries are in, and conservatories are out, which is controversial, Joe. Throughout 2022, we've seen a rise in the popularity of orangeries, that's it, which could be to do with us being accustomed to spending more time at home, and as a result feeling that we've got that sun trap appeal, because there's always a problem with conservatories, and obviously either it's too hot or too cold, but the orangeries are sort of somewhere in the middle, so they're in definitely, and conservatories are out. What's your view on that? Are you seeing that, Joe?
I think that conservatories stroke orangeries are just a matter of where they end up. So if, for example, you've got a property that doesn't allow for much space in the garden, then you do end up with a conservatory, because it's kind of just looking for that extra space, extra room that you might be able to have, or somewhere to turn into a study, or just generally enjoy a little bit of the warmth that does come through that. The orangery, I suppose, is the posher end for what it's worth. It has a roof on it without having the plastic or the glass as such, but theoretically it does the same thing. It's just that sounds obviously a lot posher, doesn't it, having an orangery, or in your case, an orange tree. But yeah, I think they have been very, very popular. Conservatories, Paul, were always popular to purely because they were just another simpler way to add another room to the property. Also, there wasn't any issues about planning because they didn't see them as a major addition. It was done above the surface, even though there's a little bit of footings there, but not the original footings and foundations that one would have for a house or an extension. So it was kind of a bit of a loophole, should say, that it allows you to have the extra room without having to go through the whole rigmarole of planning. But they certainly were very, very popular throughout the pandemic. There's no doubt about it. And because people were having to consider working from home and needed extra space and extra room. So I think there's definitely a demand for them. And the orangeries, of course, when one lives in the countryside, one has to have an orangery as opposed to a conservatory, I suppose. So that's how it would be.
Is there any difference in the planning that you need? I mean, we know that at certain size, up to a certain size, 3 meters, I think it isn't it? A conservatory, you can put one up without having to get permission. But is it the same with the orangery? Because they tend to be some more of a brick built affair right to the roof, but with the glass section in the top.
Yes, because, like I said, it's because of the footings and the foundations that you've had to allow. So when you're going to put a brick building as such, then some element of planning is going to be required. Hence why the conservatories are probably more popular than the orangeries. And also, even though if you're constructing a proper orangery with footings and foundations planning, you're also taking up a little bit more space than you perhaps would do with um, a UPVC frame as opposed to a brick frame, because all of a sudden as a brick frame you're taking the width of the brick itself and maybe the breeze blocks and all sorts of other things that'll start. So more space is required, I would think, if you're looking to put an orangery up. Less space is required and a bit more malleable with a conservatory. The end result is they do pretty much the same. It's just that the average 3-bed terrace, semi-detached type of property may only be able to host a conservatory as opposed to a orangery. But yes, the demand has definitely been there without a shadow of a doubt. Like I said, it's the cheaper option of having another room added to your property.
It's quite ironic, really, from my perspective, thinking about this, because they're saying here that in the up and coming colder months, it's nice to be able to host a dinner party in your orangery. And the irony of it is, of course, that with all the houses being made into open living, they've lost their dining room, and now they're putting the dining room in the orangery.
Yes, I was reading that earlier on about that, and I mean that changed a lot, didn't it? In the pandemic, it was actually the demand of a dining room, study, separate living room, the kitchen not being knocked into one. All of those was far, far higher than the open plan, because basically, if you were working from home and you had the children in one corner, wanted to place on the racetrack or something, and the missus cooking, and you're trying to do your Zoom call, it just wasn't going to happen. And then orangeries and conservatories came in and thought, I'll go and lock myself in that. Or as the normal case is with chaps, they get a little shed at the bottom of the garden, and so that they're chucked over there, and that's their orangery and conservatory and hideout probably, and peace. But yes, I mean the designs were changed a lot in probably about 15, 20 years ago now, when everything became open plan. They took out all the walls. And actually, then during the COVID time, we noticed that a lot of people were putting them back in because they realised that it just wasn't working at home. If you've got the whole lot at home, where do we escape to? You just can't. So yes, then maybe one's dinner party was going to be at the orangery, but then you're spending a lot of money to try and get an orangery in there. So yeah, it certainly brought things home to roost as far as the lifestyle and the living accommodation that we actually now need. And actually, it's a continuation, isn't it, really? Because even though that was a pandemic time, what has happened is that people are still continuing to operate from home some days, and realize that really they do need that extra room or that extra space where they can go and do their Zoom calls and so forth, and just be away from the hustle and the bustle of the family.
And just for the benefit of balance, of course, Joe, it may well be the mister at the kitchen sink doing their cooking as well. It's not just the missus.
Yes, of course, it's very possible that
anyway,
you might be doing your curries. I know you like to do those, so I didn't want to play you out.
I'll just keep you on the straight and narrow. Don't worry. So open plan living, 60% of people in the UK say they much prefer open plan living. So if you haven't got your kitchen and dining room knocked into one these days, you really are taking yourself out of a lot of the marketplace by the sound of it. 60% is a high figure for people who want open plan living. But I guess we all quite like that spacious, airy feel. And now we've got these bifold doors that we can put across the back of the property. And I suspect that's a reason why the conservatory is suddenly unpopular, because you've got to take that down to put your bifolds in. So everybody wants that kind of airy space at the back of the house looking out onto the garden, don't they?
The good thing about having a property, of course, is that we have all these situations like the pain of having the bifold doors and a conservatory or not a conservatory, maybe an orangery, not an orangery, maybe bifold doors, maybe patio doors, maybe a long garden, short garden, all of these things. It's not just about the properties; it's all those fellas that are going to be kept busy trying to appease your mind's eye and think, oh well, actually I prefer to having bifolding doors, so let's knock this out and start here again. So it keeps the wheels of the property industry rotating quite nicely, really, I think.
Interesting one, this actually. Exterior lighting. I suppose you often drive past these houses these days with these very trendy angular LED lights on the front of the houses, and obviously approach lights to keep everyone safe and have the chance of burglary, of course, reduced as a result of having good lighting around the property. I mean, that's always been an obvious one to have, but it's interesting that seems to appeal all of a sudden. I mean, most houses have exterior lighting now, but do you think they're talking about these very trendy LED things that we see on properties now? Is that what they're after?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of LED solar powered lights. So one can be a little bit more flamboyant. And because obviously with the prices of electricity nowadays, you don't particularly want to be lighting your place up like a Christmas tree, knowing that you've got to keep the bills low down. But there are so many more of these LED type of operations with solar panels, solar powered cells in them that allows them to have that. And yes, I think it really enhances a house. But what I would say at this point for anybody is more than lights. Get your names of the houses or the numbers put up much more clearly. Nothing is worse than trying to drive down somewhere with a car up your backside and trying to find a number or a name. And absolutely wonderfully, they've shoved it up in a tree branch because that was the nearest thing they could nail it to. And it's of course blended into the wood of the back of the tree, and you no longer can read it, but it's there and they've made the right effort. So if anybody wants to make a really good conscience about their property, maybe put a number that is legible and a light that goes onto the number, or even the name, and that might be kind of funky, really, and people could actually find you. But of course, if you don't want to be found, you won't put lights on it, or you won't put numbers on it, and then people drive up and down hoping that they find it by process of elimination. And I'm saying that from my point of view, not being the cook in the house, Paul, but being the agent. When I'm out there trying to find somewhere, I mean, it's an absolute farce to try and find the houses. And yes, it's nice to have a funky LED light, but if it's not shining on the number or the name, it really isn't doing its job.
That sounds like a bitter experience there. Greenhouses is the next one on the list, which is interesting. 27 million people enjoy gardening in the UK. We're reliably informed here. And I suppose having had such a great summer this year, people are mindful of the fact of how much they managed to get to use a garden, or would have liked to have used a garden if they'd had one. So greenhouses, so that you can sort of grow your own veg and things like that, I suppose, and have a hobby. And obviously the garden being well maintained. It's always been an obvious one, I guess, Joe, hasn't it, really?
I think the thing in the UK, the garden actually 9 times out of 10 is far better than the interior in most cases. People love their gardening, and they seem to spend a lot of time and energy out in the garden. Number of things. Once it's there, it's almost fresh to the eye, and you think, oh, that's pretty. It looks nice. Secondly, fresh air as you're out and about and doing those, and it's kind of almost an instant relief of sort of feel good factor when you've got a nice garden and the roses are out and the grass is cut. I mean, I'm not a keen gardener as per that to say, but I would certainly enjoy a lawn that's been cut nicely, and then you can put your table out and put your pint out there, and all of a sudden it just feels and tastes better. So I think the gardening aspect is very high on the agenda. And of course, as an agent, I've always been advocate in saying that those first impressions are very, very important. So, and as British, as English goes, they love the garden. I'm not going to say that that is the biggest love for many people, because I find that as soon as there's a nice garden, most people tarmac it at the front to stick their cars on it, or the trailer or other bits, and then the love of the garden goes from the front. But the back gardens definitely make a lot of effort.
And it's no surprise with 3/4 of Brits now saying that they feel they have a better work-life balance as a result of hybrid working from home. The other big one on the list, the top 5, was the home office, of course, which has become the sought-after thing. It's often that third or second small bedroom, isn't it, Joe, that they can convert into the office. This one and the open plan living really top of people's agenda when looking for a property. But I guess if you haven't got that extra bedroom, it's quite hard to make one.
Yeah, I mean, the only places that those bedrooms can be added to is in the loft, because normally the loft area is kind of the dead area that has never been used. But in a house, that's okay because it's part of your structure, your infrastructure. In a flat, you've got to be careful who owns the loft space or the roof area. You might find that you don't. We've had those experiences when we bought a flat and found that there's a fantastic loft up there, and you should be able to go and add another room or two with an ensuite and all that, and then knocks on the door and says, actually, you don't own that, so can you rip it all out again, because that doesn't belong to you. So do be careful on those parts in flats, masonettes, etc., that you do own or have right of way or access over the loft. But certainly the lofts have been the number one area for growth. Number two, probably conservatory and orangeries, as you would say. And third one in the ranking is probably some sort of basement, because there's a lot of people now actually beginning to dig underneath, because, you know, as I've always said, even in the country, you can only go up or down. Very rarely can you go out, because you're already tied. If you're a terracist, and a row of terrace of 4 houses, well, you can't go either side, can you? So, and you can't go at the front. There's only one area potentially at the back, but if you only got a 40-foot garden and 15 or 20 foot of that's taken up with an orangery or conservatory, you're shrinking your little garden area. So roof loft area becomes very popular, and of course now potentially there's a lot of talk about basements and taking that office area, that study area, perhaps into the lower ground floor.
The list does seem a little superficial. I mean, you think about people wanting to buy a property. You might want to be making sure that the heating system is really up to date and efficient. Excuse me. You probably want to be looking at sizes of rooms, for example, south or east facing or west facing or whatever. Those seem to be not on the list. They're things like the exterior lighting and the greenhouse and so on. They do seem rather superficial. I just wondered if it was a very young cohort of people they were asking.
I think you'll also find that it's about what we buy with our eyes. One of my most popular sayings that they go, this is what we see is what we like. The other things that we would like to talk about sometimes are things that actually don't become attracted to our eyes. So things like outside lighting, if you're driving past. I always say, if you're in your car with your partner or your friends or whatever, there are roads you will drive down and you'll all turn around and go, oh, this is a nice road, I'd love to live here. And then you go down to another road, you think, good God, let's get out of here quick. And that's part of what we buy with our eyes. And that's why I constantly say that, the exterior of the property should always look the best, because people make a decision not only on the area but also on the type of house. And if they make a decision on the type of house and on the area, then of course they're looking to pay good money for your house. So actually it enhances the value if you are presenting it well. So it's what we see. So lighting outside, clear signages, good gardens, good fencing, all of those things are things that, make it more attractive. So I think the people asked are probably not so much they're young or old. I think it's just what they see, and they think, oh, that's what's more appealing to me. I'd like a nice garden or a nice lighting on the outside. Because as you rightly say, we've noticed of late, when you drive past these LED sort of downlighters, uplighters onto the wall or whatever are appealing, and then and you do take a turn of the head and go, oh, well, that's nice. Well, that's a big house, and it's probably not. It's just that they've actually lit up the pier that's actually outside the house, but all of a sudden it looks much grander or bigger, doesn't it? So.
Yeah, they certainly do stand out, that's for sure. Let's move tack and talk about the 6 major challenges facing property developers. We've talked a lot on Property Matters about the fact that house building is not going to plan, in terms of the government's plan at least. They're not building enough homes to set their own targets. And excuse me, the a new survey that's come out from a company called Unlatch reveals that just one of the many things that they're struggling with, property developers at the moment, is a 16% drop in construction workers. It's just one of the many challenges facing Britain's house builders. And of course, rising cost of materials and the notorious EWS1 form, which in the back end of the whole Grenfell tragedy has become a big thing for developers. And this is a real thing, because the over the past 5 years, the size of Britain's construction industry workforce has shrunk by 3%, falling from 2.27 million in 2017 to 2.1 million in 2022. So even more startling is the decline that Britain has seen in the number of self-employed members of the construction workforce, which has fallen by 15%, nearly 16%. In fact, in 2017, there were 852,000 workers. Today, there's just 693,000. It's not easy for a property developer out there at the moment, is it, Joe?
No, I mean, property developing is a very challenging area all round, and I've certainly noticed it having discussions with many property developers of the number of restrictions and the number of new measures, new laws and things that have been added in order to get things underway. And the EWS situation doesn't help, because all the exterior, the cladding and the firewalls, etc., and the sprinklers in some cases, all those extra additions that you've had to add to a development, unfortunately, are equally expensive as well. And there's a knock-on effect, isn't it? If you don't do the certain things, you don't get the insurance. If you don't get the insurance, you can't lend money, and it goes on and on and on and on. And I think so. Developers are having a tough time. Over and above that, of course, as you rightly say, the cost of the materials is absolutely gone gaga. You know, it's over the top now, and at the end of the day, it's all going to get passed on to the consumers. You're going to have to pay. If you want an extension, you're going to have to pay more to have that extension done. Whether it's labour cost or whether it's materials, something's going to come. And even labour cost is gone, absolutely sky high, because the number of people are less. Skilled people are not there, and there are many reasons, of course, of why that's not the case. So yeah, it is. The developers are finding it tough. And I can't understand why the government want to have such targets, because when actually half of the rules are created by them in the first place for them to implement, and that makes it even more challenging.
Yeah, they're suggesting that Brexit obviously was a main reason why so much skilled labour left the UK. And those that remain are rapidly aging, which is an interesting factor, because I was talking to a fairly elderly builder the other day, as a matter of fact, and he said that he, every year, as a director, he takes it upon himself to go and find young people who perhaps weren't as academic, but were very good with their hands, that kind of thing. And it talks to families and says, look, don't. The other thing being, of course, if you go to university now, the cost that you're going to be left with is so dramatic that very often there's an apprenticeship there, which is a great way to earn while you're trading, and you can end up with a good career, and you'll always be working.
I'm really on board with that idea. But the problem is, it's not as attractive as sitting on your butt, fiddling around on a computer and earning the money that generates, and that's the problem. I mean, we don't find the people that want to actually get their hands dirty and get down and be a plumber and an electrician and all that. Yet they are doing exceedingly well. Manual work like that, skilled manual work, is paying extremely well. And you can hardly ever book a plumber or an electrician. I mean, they are booked like, weeks, if not months ahead for work. So there's no shortage. However, it's just not attractive, is it? It's just like getting down on your knees and sort of trying to find someone's pipe and fix that and all that kind of stuff. It's just what now isn't. At a time when I was at school, which is obviously a long, long time ago, these things were what we were taught. And I think schools are not dealing with that now. And that's where the problem is. We had motor vehicle maintenance, for example, in our school when I was there, and that was kind of exciting. So you used to take an engine apart and then put it back together again and fire it up. Well, I don't think that is something that particularly happens. Metalwork, woodwork, TED, technical drawing, and all that kind of stuff, that we used to do, I don't think exists, because it's all now done on your computer or your iPad or whatever, and it doesn't have that same touchy-feely scenario, and I don't think people get attracted. The other problem is the marketing. The marketing of a university is way up there, and that an apprentice isn't as good as it was. But when I was at school, the apprentice was a great role to have, because you used to say, okay, well, I'm going to do an apprenticeship, and I'm going to get paid, and I'm going to get a qualification, and I'm going to do it. Now, it's like, if you do an apprenticeship, you're obviously not worthy of a degree. So that marketing of making somebody feel wanted and desired so I think it's down to schools, I think it's marketing, but I would love to be able to turn around and say that, if there was a way that we could create a situation where there's more skilled workers, more people that love to, work with the hand, there is. And one thing that is really good about the UK is that we produce some of the best engineers, some of the best things that we put together. When I think about Crossrail and all those things, I mean, that stuff is just incredible if you ever watch it. How we managed to do that, what we managed to do, but we're not selling to the youngsters that this has got a future. It's not as funky as perhaps, I don't know, sitting on a laptop.
Yes, he was saying that when they get the youngsters in, they give them 6 months before they send them to college, and they literally attach them to the different trades that are coming in on the build that they're working on, and ask them just to sit with them for a while and work with them, and then find which one draws them in the most, and then that's what they will become, whether they become a carpenter or electrician or what. But seemed like a good way of getting them to find what it is that they want to do, which was nice to hear. But again, he's well over retirement age, but still working. His 35-year-old son is now running the company for him. But interesting to see that they've got quite a proactive approach to finding young people. But he did admit that it's particularly hard. The other thing, of course, that the developers are facing, Joe, is increasing costs, like us all, really. 24% this year, the core materials have gone up, and of course there's the supply chain issues as well.
Yeah, I mean, the cost of materials is gone absolutely, and not only has it cost gone up, the supply is really behind. So jobs are getting delayed. People are not being able to finish things off because material isn't arriving, or if it is, you're almost being rationed to what you can have and what you can't have, because everybody wants the same material. For example, plasterboards and chipboards and things like that. People constantly want them to either board up or hoard up, whichever way you want to do it. But there's always, a huge shortage of decent plasterboard. When I'm talking to people, say, I know it sounds ridiculous, my friend, but the problem is we can't even get the plasterboard, to do the things that we want to do. So yeah, there's a huge shortage of good material. I mean, obviously there is cheaper materials available, but then, you kind of resort to that because you want to get the job finished. And I think the other thing I want to just pick up on a point you just said there about, the gentleman you spoke about, whose son is now taking over the business. That is a very, very rare thing that happens, because most children do not and are not interested in taking over their parents' businesses. Because they've been educated to a level where they don't need to be taken over to that business. And secondly, it's not been something that's been drummed into them. So, the chap you've talked about is a very lucky man to be able to have somebody who is actually going to carry on the business, the good thing that he's done for his family and children. But today that doesn't exist because the children are educated, gone to university, and they've gone into something completely different. And whatever you're doing is not something that is attractive to them anymore. it was good enough for you, but it's not good enough for them.
Another challenge that they've got is poor build quality, Joe. They're suggesting that actually low productivity and the standard of work very poor, and we're below other countries in terms of our productivity, and the standard of new builds needs to be better. They're saying that there should be a need to refine building codes, make them stricter, a strong review process or stronger review process, and also the adoption of digital technology, which are a few of the ways that they can support the better build quality. What's your view of build quality, particularly on new builds, Joe?
Well, I think the build quality is normally quite appalling. We've been through some experiences ourselves with clients that have been building, and part of it is blamed on the materials, part of it is blamed on the kind of labor that they get in to do it, the skill set. Part of it is because they want to cut cost and try to make as much profit, and therefore that quality doesn't tend to come through. And the few that do come through obviously do well, but 99.9% of them are not coming through that. And the irony of that is, I often ask myself, how is it that back 100 years ago people have built like I don't know, let's take the Natural History Museum building in London. When I go past that every time, I wonder to myself, my God, look at this thing. This was like built hundreds of years ago. It's looking great. It's still looking great, and no issues, no building construction issues, and so on. Yet we put these modern boxes up and have nothing but trouble with them. It's like Meccano sets, and you think to yourself, well, how can't we do that simple building easier when you've got this complex building like the Natural History Museum and castles, etc., which were built obviously to precision and for longevity, which they're still lasting many, many years later. So it's just about, I think, the cheapness of what we're trying to do, and the skill sets that we're getting. If you had an old property and you had to make sash windows, for argument's sake, or you had to make something that was internal in keeping, I mean, that skill is so rare that you end up paying a king's ransom. I'll say a king's ransom because we now have a king's ransom for the build cost, because it's impossible to find the skill set to do such things.
Yeah, the EWS form, we mentioned it earlier on, Joe. The builders are reporting that it's taking up to a year to get one for the property. So when they build sort of a rise of flats, for example, it's taking up to a year to get this, of course, and mortgage lenders won't lend until there is an EWS one in place, of course. And this is leading to a huge backlog in transactions. I wasn't aware of that, was you?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not just the huge transactions, it's the huge cost that is being put up by the builder sitting there waiting for these things to happen. It's a mess, in all honesty. Something that is fairly simple is now more complex. And it's complex by virtue of the people that have made it complex and bringing it in and so forth. And of course, current market trends and things like, Brexit and the pandemic and all sorts of other scenarios that have happened have not made it easier for people to actually engage into those. So yeah, those costs, whatever the costs are, being passed down, and hence we are where we are at the moment.
I'm guessing that, as we've seen with the Grenfell inquiry, that people are very unwilling to put their name to things unless they're 1,000% sure everything's okay now, because obviously there was a lot of shortcuts and corners taken rather swiftly to get those things in the first place, and now it's all unravelling, of course, in the inquiry, and which has just come to an end this last week, as a matter of fact. And I guess people are a little bit reticent to be so forthcoming.
Yeah, I mean, naturally, you're going to be cautious. I mean, who wants to put their name to something that's going to cause them, trouble? Let alone the grief and the upset it's caused the people that lost their lives and the families that lost their loved ones. I mean, that's insurmountable, isn't it? So nobody wants to be the person that is going to be had a go at. And like I said, those situations are what have made it more complex. And the more complex it becomes, the more expensive it becomes, and subsequently the delay that happens. And yeah, so that's why the governments are behind on their numbers. On the other hand, the government turns around and says, well, you've got to pay for this, you've got to pay for that, you've got to pay for this. That isn't healthy either, because obviously nobody wants to continue to have a constant bill on their hand for things like, especially taxation. And then you almost want to say, well, okay, it's not worth me building it. What's the point of me doing it? It's not worth doing it. So then we have this homelessness situation when they're saying that, oh, we need all these homes and we haven't got homes to give to people. So it's a bit of a knock-on effect, Paul.
Last one on the list, mothballing land sites. Apparently this is happening more and more at the moment. Builders are thinking, looking at these interest rates, looking at the mortgage costs, looking at the material costs, looking at the lack of labour, as we just discussed. Do you know what? I think I'll just put that bit of land to one side and I'll come back to that when things look a little bit better. And of course, that's been exacerbated by the fact that they've been getting into build to rent, which we've talked about several times on the show, because there's been a huge rise in that side of the industry since the COVID lockdown, and probably a little bit simpler to get your return on.
Yes, I mean, mothballing is if you bought a site cash and you don't have borrowing on it of any sort, then you can afford to mothball it. If you have borrowed on it and borrowed maybe at the higher rate or the higher percentage, then yes, developers, builders alike are thinking, you know what, I can't continue to pay for this indefinitely, so it's better for me to either get rid of it or find a route that's going to happen. If it's not going to be planning, and if it's not going to be the fact that they're going to build it or they can get around to do it, they are either selling it, or as you rightly say, if they got the money and they bought the cash, they are mothballing it because there's too many regulations and too many restrictions. And also nobody has, and whilst I'd love to say that Mystic Meg and I are quite well related in terms of finding the future and saying things like that, for the first time I would say that there are things that are now not in our controls, and there's a combination. We've had in history, my 40 odd years, it's been the interest rate that has been the driver. It goes up, it goes down, it kind of controls it. Stamp duty, we know those mechanisms that have allowed us to understand and adjust. And now there is the curveball that's come through called utilities, and it all came in at the same time. And so that caused a huge issue, because obviously there's gas, electric, petrol. I mean, I was dumbfounded to see that. I went past a petrol station and it is actually 1.98. So we are not far from £2 for a litre or a gallon of petrol or diesel. Sorry, diesel, not petrol, diesel. And so all of those costs have all come in at the one time. That has thrown a lot of things offline. And so, there will be a massive adjustment that one was not normally expecting and normally saying. So there will be a lot of parking in neutral for a while until they can adjust which way it's going to go in terms of what the build's going to be at the end.
Who'd be a property developer in 2022, Joe?
Well, the good thing is that we're nearly at the end of 2022, so let's look forward to 2023, and maybe you'd be a developer in 2023 once some of this has been tidied up.
So next weekend we'll be looking at the results of the Chancellor's statement. Have you got any hunches of how that's going to pan out for property owners and developers?
Yeah, I suppose the reality is that we're going to get hit. Why are we going to get hit? Because obviously, whilst the pandemic was on, most people did okay out of the property side of it. So it'll be property that will do. Most people invest in property, and that's why there's a bit of a break on in that. But it won't kill it, because one thing is that you can't kill the golden egg, and the golden egg is property, and people will continue to want to buy. At the moment, the first time buyers are definitely struggling because the cost of borrowing has gone up. Affordability calculators are not allowing them to borrow what they wanted to borrow, and so forth. But that will get adjusted. That will get adjusted with that correction that is going to happen because of those situations. So I think within the next 3 to 6 months we'll be back on track. And we would have done all right, but a certain lady came in for about 30 days and completely bomb blasted the whole world. And those are the shrapnel we're now picking up, basically. But we'll get through.
Indeed, yes. I mean, that day when the Chancellor stands up and makes his statement will be with us very, very soon, as will next Sunday, when we will be back with another Property Matters next Sunday, 10 a.m.